Welcome to New Atlas Live. Joining me today is Garland Nixon. He's a political commentator. I will call him an analyst. He does excellent work. This is his first time coming on. Hello, Garland. How are you?
Hey, Brian. Thanks for inviting me. I love your show. Watch it all the time. I never miss an episode.
And likewise, and for people who don't know, I go on Radio Sputnik every week with you and Dr. Wilmer Leon, and it's a great time. It's at midnight for me, so it's a little tough, but let's get right into it. I've heard little bits and pieces about your backgrounds, watching your live streams. You'll mention something here and there. Just for people who may never have seen you before, can you just kind of give a little background about yourself, how you got into doing political commentary and analysis, and why are you doing it?
Well, let's see. I'll go. I was in law enforcement for years. I retired as actually a police official in the United States. I mean, in Maryland, state of Maryland. When I retired, I was working for the governor's office. I started dealing with the American Civil Liberties Union back in the 1990s. I eventually became on the board of directors for the state of Maryland, and then on the national board of directors. Many years I was on the board of directors of the ACLU. I came up with some very serious conflicts within at some point, and resigned in protest from the ACLU board. I just at one point I started doing when I was with the ACLU. I'm a very left-leaning person. There was a conservative radio station in Baltimore that said they wanted someone to come on from the ACLU to debate about the death penalty, and I came on and I debated them, and we had fun, and I laughed and joked, and it was humorous, and they were surprised that someone that disagreed with them didn't hate their guts and just attack them. We just had a disagreement with a lot of jokes and fun, and they said, can you come on every week from now on and do a radio show with us? And that's how I got started on radio. Eventually, one day I got a call from Fox News in New York. I started doing various radio shows. I ended up getting one with Pacifica Network in Washington, D.C. One week I got a call from New York from Fox News and said, hey, we'd like you to come up here. We've been listening to your show, blah, blah, blah. And I was on a show on Fox News. I did one interview, and then they asked me to come back. And before I knew it, I was on Fox News for many years. I was on pretty much every show on Fox News except Hannity. I was never on Hannity, but all the rest I was on. And I was so I did radio and TV. I eventually started doing a TV show on the Fox affiliates in New York City, Philadelphia, all of New England. And it was a news show. I did that regularly. And interestingly enough, I left that because the host of the show started to take more time off. And they asked me, hey, why don't you start hosting the show? So I started hosting a TV show. And I'm like, wow, my career's taking off here. And they were saying, good things are going to be happening for you, Garland. Things are looking good, right? And I started reading from a teleprompter. And I did it 1 month and I left. So that's it. I'm done. And I left. And it's funny because everybody wants to do everybody in this business wants to be on the mainstream media and in national TV. And I was. After 1 week, I said, no, 1 month. After all of those years, 1 month of reading from a teleprompter at Fox, I was like, I'm out of here. And so now I do my show on Radio Sputnik. I also have a show on the Pacifica Network in Washington, D.C., and a show on the Pacifica Network, KPFK, in Los Angeles. And, of course, my YouTube show. So that's kind of my history. I'm a real left-leaning person, but I am of a philosophical nature. I'm always searching for the truth, searching for reality, searching for the answer. So I don't let my ideological bend blind me. If reality ever does not coincide with something that I think or believe, I change what I think or believe. I don't try to adjust reality. And so that's, I think, why I get along with a lot of people of various ideological alignments, because I love people and I don't dislike people simply because we disagree on particular political issues.
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the things I like the most about you. I mean, you're very down to earth. You're very reasonable. And there are not many people who can separate their personal ideology with just objectively looking at what's going on. And the other thing I like about you is that you get everything right about what's going on with Russia and also China. It's very hard to find people that they could get one or the other, but usually not both. There's a small and growing number that are, but you're one of them. So that's something that I really appreciate about you. Which one do you want to start talking about first, Russia or China?
Let's
They
start with
both
the
kind of
Russia, China,
sure,
Ukraine stuff.
sure. So, what are you watching closest? Are you watching the offensive, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant saga, the Wagner incident, as I'm
I think
calling it?
something, well, and I think something that's going on in Europe, I like to see the relationship between things, right? So, okay, the Wagner supposed coup attempt or whatever the case may be, right? I like to try to find things to relate. Let's look at France right now. All of this talk that we heard, Russia's unstable, it's falling apart, the people are freaking out. It's like we're watching World War Z. They're running in different directions and eating each other. That's what we'd heard about Russia, right? But Russia is a country that has a strong central government, and it has a very unified electorate. And the people, I would argue that the government more or less represents the needs of the people, and that means that they have a unity and an alignment with the people. So 24 hours of this so-called coup, and it was out of here. No madness, no World War Z. Now let's look at France right now. I don't know if for those of you who haven't been watching, you need to go on Twitter and look. It's burning. That people are freaking out. It looks like a zombie apocalypse. And what is that about to me? It's about a history of colonialism and violence and madness and hypocrisy. And they go around the world. Right now, what is it? The country of Niger that has all that gold? They don't get a dime of it. It all goes right into the Bank of France. And people wonder, why is it that the Africans and the Middle Easterners, et cetera, are all siding with Russia? Because they have been oppressed and colonialized and mistreated. I have, you might have heard of the Uhuru movement, the people, African People's Socialist Party that the FBI is going after. I was interviewing their leader, and he said, Garland, think about this. His name is Omali Yeshitali. He says, why is it that you look around the United States and you don't find any black people with Chinese or Russian last names? Because they were colonialized by the Chinese and Russians. That's why the African people, if you look at it, are siding with the Africans and Russians, because if you look at it, they understand history and who was on their side and who was screwing them over. So I say, isn't it interesting that a week ago we were being told by the imperial and colonialist powers in Europe, who historically have mistreated people and robbed them all over the world, how Russia was going to fall apart, it was dropping, blah, blah, blah. A week later, you look at France, and France is in flames and falling apart. And if you look at what's happening, if you look at the guy who got killed and this all started, he is, I think, is it Algerian descent, I believe it is. Anyway, one of the former colonies. And in France, they don't have birthright citizenship. So you can be, your father, your grandfather, or whatever could have come from one of these countries that France colonized, but you're still not a citizen. You got to work under the table. You don't get any benefits. You don't get, so the area where this guy was in is very poor. And the area that he was in is carrying the legacy of French colonialism. Right? The struggle of French colonialism is still alive in neighborhoods like that. And as soon as they had an issue and this guy got killed, I think what's happening in France is an explosion of historical anger over what France did. I mean, they like genocided like millions of people in these countries, right? They still have a historical anger there and angst. And I think that's what's coming out now. It's history coming back to bite France in the behind. But a week ago, we were being told that Russia's unstable and it's going to fall apart. And reality now is the chickens, what's the old saying? The skies are darkened with the flapping of the wings of chickens that are coming home to roost.
And do you think that Macron will be weakened by all this? Because remember, we kept hearing about how Putin was weakened by this less than 24-hour incident. And now, and another thing I want to ask you is about, I don't like it when I hear people say, oh, it's all these migrants, it's all these immigrants causing problems in France. The whole reason you have people like that there in France or all across Europe or in the United States is because the US and Europe, they destroy these people's countries. They leave them with nothing. They go to where there is something, where they think they could have a stable life. So I don't like that, and I don't know how much of that is playing into the coverage. It's between that and in the United States, but so there's these two issues: the Wagner incident and now France. I mean, it is burning, and I'm seeing the footage, and some of it is pretty disturbing. and you don't see the Western media covering it the same way they covered the situation in Russia. Well, what else? And what about the offensive? And also, you're in the United States. I'm an American, but I have been looking from the outside in for so long. Maybe you could give us some insight into what average American people are thinking as they look at this situation unfold in Ukraine.
Well, one of the things that's happening in America now is that I think more and more people are waking up. I think America is moving in the right direction when it comes to media. And this is very much related to your question. The mainstream media is dying. People are, there is a mass exodus from MSNBC and CNN and Fox. I was glad to see Tucker Carlson leave. I used to go on his show. I used to talk. I like Tucker Carlson. I used to go on. As a person, he's a very nice person, right? Very, very friendly person. And when he left, he took a lot of people with him. And I think that's one more good thing. So what's happening is more and more people are going to alternative media. Yeah, you have the people who are diehard Democrats or diehard Republicans, and they're still, which is like 58 or 59% of America. 41 or 42% are independents. They've left these two parties. And I think that that same group of people is leaving mainstream media and they're going to alternative media. They're here, they're watching Mercurus, they're watching the Gray Zone, they're watching Door, they're watching people who are trying to just find out what's going on for real and relay it as best we can. So I think in the US, surprisingly, there's more and more people waking up to reality. The people that are left behind are the people that are still stuck to these two stupid parties. I do a show in LA and that's Democrat land, blue no matter who land. And when I first started, when the war first started, when the special military operation first started in LA, I would get calls, you're standing up with the Russian evil Putin people, whatever, right? Man, all the calls I get now in Los Angeles are, great job, Garland. We agree. And I say the same thing. I'm not, wherever I am, every week when I go on, I say, look, I don't care if they throw me off. I'm going to tell the truth. I do every show like it's my last show. And I had the GM, I'm not going to say who, but bottom line is, it came back to me that there were people in LA saying, yeah, Garland's our last hope. In Los Angeles, this is what Pacifica Radio is supposed to be all about, anti-war, blah, 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 because I push back on the imperial and colonial world powers, we call them neocons or whatever you call them now, the people that go around the world and screw over other people and steal their stuff. So even in Los Angeles, the callers I'm shocked. People are calling in. They're like, hey, this is Joe from Pasadena, California. He's like, let's talk about the Minsk agreements in 2014. And I'm like, holy crap. So the bottom line, I had Ray McGovern on and we talked about, he went over the 2014 coup in Ukraine really clearly about it. And I went into his background a little bit before it started. Hey, Ray McGovern, this guy was with the CIA. This is the guy that walked up to the president. This is the guy who his specialty was Sino-Soviet relationships. He speaks fluent Russian and German, all the stuff about Ray. Like, you don't have to believe me, but he's one of the foremost experts in the world. He went over the 2014 Maidan coup in detail, and callers in LA called in and said, hey, I didn't know that. How come I didn't know that? So to me, it's a positive thing. People are waking up in America bit by bit. So I think we're moving in the right direction. And RFK Jr., Cornel West, even Trump. Trump will say some things that really makes me want to choke him at times. But the bottom line, he says some things that also make you want to stand up and applaud. It's the best of both worlds, the worst of both worlds and the best of both worlds with Trump. But bottom line is this. We now have political voices going into the election season who are saying, hey, man, we need to stop all this warmonger crap. Hey, the FBI and the CIA is out of control. I think that the Biden neocons pushed it so far that now the natural pushback in the United States is happening. And I think it's a good thing. And I think we're moving in the right direction. I feel good about the direction we're going. It's slowly, but it's like a battleship. You turn the wheel and you wait, and it starts to come around slowly but surely. But it comes around, and once it starts turning, you ain't going to stop it.
That's a good analogy. And something else that I like about your live show that you do, I heard you talking many times about I guess just to kind of summarize it, no need for political ideological purism. Someone might say something you disagree with, but when they say something that you agree with, support them. Come out and at least support the idea, the thing that they're saying that you agree with, because you're never going to find the perfect candidate. And even if voting these people into the White House, ultimately no one's going to listen to them, they're a figurehead or whatever, the system is going to understand that this is what people want. They're catching on. This is what they want. And even if they have to do something to address that, you don't fix all your problems. At least it's a step in the right direction. So I think that's an important message that I've heard many times on your live stream, especially about the upcoming elections. I think that it is changing and going in the right direction. But we still have to work very hard on all of this. What about the Western media right now in the United States? Because I don't really like. I check like CNN, BBC, just a couple of articles, but on TV, what do you hear when you turn on the TV in the United States, especially now about Ukraine and the offensive? How is the offensive going according to the TV?
I think it disappeared. I think it's conspicuously absent from the news. And yeah, let's face it. I mean, I'm with you. I can't watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox anymore. Cannot watch it at all. I could watch Tucker Carlson, but the rest of that crap I can't watch. Because I mean, when you turn it on, it's nothing but lies and perversions of the truth. It's nothing but a psyop on all of us. And, Washington Post, New York Times, you get nothing but the latest musings of an unnamed intelligence official who, probably wrote the story and emailed it to him from Langley, Virginia. So the reality is, and as so many people, more and more people can't even watch it anymore. And it's just so obvious that the people there are simply the voice of the ruling elite, the voice of the corporate power, the voice of the political parties. So there's really the only, and I'm sure you understand this, the only reason I will go to the Washington Post or the New York Times is to find a story to say, look at this crap, look what they're saying. Or to, like, they had an article about in the New York Times a few weeks ago, it was about the Nazi insignias in Ukraine. And it was basically saying the problem is that they're wearing swastikas and they're wearing this and they're wearing insignias and blah, blah, blah. Well, that was the perfect opportunity for me to bring that article up and say, the issue ain't the uniforms or the patches. It's the ideology that drives them to wear such uniforms and patches. But that also allowed me to expose the New York Times. So more or less, I think these types of media outlets are used very skillfully, I might add, by people like us in the alternative media to demonstrate the hypocrisy, to demonstrate the lies. They're actually a valuable tool for us because they're so over the top in their lies, and it's out of desperation. You know what I mean? Now they're so desperate. What are they going to do? Everything's falling apart. In Ukraine, I mean, what are they going to say about the offensive? They literally just like kidnap people off the street from some bar at midnight in Lvov. Train the guy for like 3 weeks on something that he should be trained for 6 months to a year on. And then they say, take this thing, put it in forward and drive into that minefield. Kidnapping victims in a minefield is not an offensive. It's a kamikaze operation. And so what are they going to say about the kamikaze operation, really?
That is a really good point. And when people do wake up, it's impossible for them to go back to sleep. You can't wake up to the lies on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC and then go back to it and listen to it. It's impossible. So I think that is kind of our role, is to get people to wake up. I wouldn't say, well, you don't have to explain everything, but if you could find a few things, and using the Western media against itself, I think is really important. When people accuse me, I don't know about you, Garland, how many times a day you get accused of working for the Chinese or Russian government, but I ask people, what are they paying me to do? Read the Washington Post to them, read the NED's website to them, because it's all laid out there. If you just pick through the way they line up the rhetoric to lie to you, the truth is actually buried in there someplace. So So you're saying the offensive is kind of, what are Americans focused on? What does it seem they're worried about the most? Just in general, it doesn't even have to be geopolitics.
Well, it's always the same thing. It's the economy. You know what I mean? When it comes down to the truth about politics, having studied politics for all of these years, the average person wants to whatever. They want to raise their family or live their life or, whatever. If they're some single guy, they want to chase girls or, go hang out on a Friday night and have a couple brewskis and watch the game. People just want to live an enjoyable life and have fun. And when it comes down to it, I think that's what it comes down to. I think that the people in power have to introduce them to these other things. You should be concerned about Iran and Taiwan and democracy or whatever other kind of amorphous thing they have to introduce to them. You should be, and then they have to introduce them to whatever they're saying and then tell them why they should be concerned about it. Because in reality, people are looking at their lives. They're looking at their things they can see and feel and touch in their jobs and their future and things of that nature. That's why politicians who address those issues tend to be the most successful politicians. We now have a couple of parties who don't address those at all. And we do, like I said, we do have Cornel West, who I've met before and talked to before, who is a very nice person. If you ever listen to him, you're ever around him, what you'll find about Cornel West is he's a nice guy, and he thinks about, his background is a preacher and a lot of religious things. So he thinks about the poor people, the struggling, things like that. That's his focus, and around the world, why are we screwing over people and doing violent things? So you got him talking. You got RFK Jr. Again, going to our conversation earlier, there are people that are mad at RFK Jr. because of what he said about Israel. I don't agree with what he said about Israel. However, that being said, my opinion is this. I don't care what politician in the United States you talk about, that's what you're going to get regarding the Middle East. But if he's saying we need to dismantle empire, we need to get rid of 850 military bases around the world, Israel is basically a military base. A lot of people don't understand why the United States is doing what they're doing with Israel. Joe Biden gave it away. Joe Biden once said, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create it to address our interest in the region. Israel is basically a fort. The bottom line is this. In the 1940s or whatever, they looked and they're like, man, everything's about oil. This war, a lot of it was about who wins or loses because their access to oil. The world is about access to oil. We need an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East. I know, let's stick a country in there and we'll arm it to the teeth. That's really it's not even about a religious alignment. It's not about a political alignment. It's purely, this is our Air Force, our military base in the region of the world where there's lots of oil. That's all it is. And so the fact of the matter is this. If you dismantle the empire, the whole Israel issue will take care of itself because you won't be doing that anymore. The necessity for that base won't be there, which will change the dynamic. And the dynamics are changing it there anyway because of some of the great things I think that China's doing in the region. So, I mean, is RFK the perfect candidate? No, I don't think there's such thing. If I ran, I could probably find some things there'd probably be things that I said at the beginning of my campaign that 6 months later I'd look back and say, hey, why'd I say that? I sounded like a jerk. So I think important things are going on right now. And I think that a big part of what's happening is that we have some candidates now who the mainstream can't hide from, can't run. And you got Biden and the neocons, and we got three other major candidates in Trump, in RFK Jr., in Cornel West, who are saying we got to get out of Ukraine. We got to end that war. It's too dangerous. We got to back off all of this craziness we're doing. And like I said, I think we're going in a good direction right now. Oddly enough, as dark as things seem, because of that, I think the election season of 2024 is going to force these neocons. Oh, darn it, I forgot that. Is going to force these neocons and neoliberals to talk about some things that they really don't want to talk about.
Yeah, that is a really good point that you bring up about Israel. And I've always said that it is like forward operating base Israel. That is what it is. And yeah, he said things that I disagree with, and especially about Israel. And I know that issue gets under people's skin like nothing else. It is such a vast divide for people pro-Israel or anti-Israel, but that's its purpose. Its purpose is to elicit an emotional reaction. That's how they maintain the strategy of tension in the Middle East. So people should keep that in mind. And I think you're right. If he dismantles all of these other things, or even if he just brings attention to the fact that they need to be dismantled, eventually it's going to solve itself. And you mentioned China. I think that's another important point to emphasize. China comes in, Russia, China, they're very patient. They wait for the US to burn itself out, and they continuously build their relationship with these nations. Look in the Middle East, the changes very recently that are taking place. This isn't because everyone solved the problem instantly overnight. This was years and years in the making. Russia and China and multipolarism working step by step to solve this. People have to remember, it's a huge problem. It wasn't created overnight. It cannot be solved overnight. It certainly cannot be solved by just one election. So these are all very good points that you're bringing up. I still want to continue with Ukraine a little bit longer.
Sure.
There's the offensive. If the offensive fails, and where do you, from what you're seeing in the United States, because you kind of said that you look at the media to see the lies that they want us to believe. Looking at how the Western media, or at least the U.S. media, is framing everything that's going on, what does it seem like they're trying to prepare as the next step in Ukraine? Is it just sending more weapons? I talked about the nuclear power plant intervention. What does it seem like they're trying to tee up there?
Here's something that's interesting. In the last few days, there were reports that people in the NATO was saying that they may send troops and some security guarantees in coming up in the NATO meeting in Vilnius in a couple of weeks, that NATO may send troops. And my position has been for a while, they ain't got no troops. You can't send what you don't have. They would if they could, but they can't, so they won't. They have been demilitarized. The Russians, very wisely, the Russian people are angry about it. The Russian people want them to come in and, as one of my best friend was a football player, and his coach used to always say, kill a gnat with a sledgehammer, right? So the Russian people want the Russian government to go to Ukraine and kill a gnat with a sledgehammer, put them down and be done with them. I think very wisely. The Russians realize that time is a very valuable asset, and they're taking their time and they're moving slow. And in doing that, they created a gigantic trash compactor for NATO weaponry. And then the NATO just keeps filling the trash compactor and they just keep emptying it. And so they've created a dynamic now wherein NATO doesn't have the missiles, it doesn't have the weaponry, it doesn't have the soldiers, it doesn't have anything it needs. If it wanted to intervene, what would they do? Let's say they go in there and they get a few troops together and they start fighting. After a week, they're completely out of stuff. They got to negotiate a run because they would run out of weaponry quickly. So the Russians, because they took their time, created a dynamic where NATO can't come in if they wanted to. It would be suicide. What are they going to do? So they don't have a strategy. I also think that the political stability of the EU and the US is not in a manner that they could embark on something so outlandish that they could do this. They'd have to have a very stable a group of people, electorate behind them. The people would have to be like, rah, rah, let's go to war. At this point, this place would fall apart. You know what I mean? US would fall apart. There are a lot of people that are kind of chilling out and like trying to figure out how to survive here in the US and, trying to figure out what's going on. But if they would get suddenly dragged into a war to superpower, this place would explode. And of course, Europe's exploding and they haven't even done it. You know what I mean? What's France is going to go fight somebody else? The troops in France are fighting the French people at this point. So how the hell are they going to go fight the Russians? Macron's like having meetings with his cabinet and his war cabinet, not about the Russians. It's about what's going on in France and Germany. They're going broke. God knows the UK is an economic hellhole. So they're not in a position. They have been worn down, broken down to a point where they're trying to hold it together, and they're in no position if they wanted to fight Russia. So all they can do is try to hold on to this thing, and they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan. But here's the way I like to put it. If you're standing on a cliff and you decide to jump and you're in the air, and then once you're in the air, you say, you know what, I need a plan. Ain't no plan. You're in the air. There's only one thing that's going to happen. You jumped. You should have made a decision before you jumped. Once you jump, there ain't no plan that's going to stop. You're hitting the rocks below, and it's all over for you. They made a decision to overthrow Ukraine. They made a decision to push Russia into a corner. There ain't no plan that's going to get them out of this. The inevitability is coming, and that inevitability is that it's not that Russia's going to defeat Ukraine so much, which they could if they wanted to, that they're doing something far more strategically wise. Is they're chipping away at the foundation of Ukraine and allowing it to collapse. And it's just going to fall apart like Building 7. It's going to fall apart. And when it falls, there won't be anything for the U.S. to prop up. And I also believe this is important, because of the way they have this extinction level war going on in Ukraine. At some point, the Ukrainian people are going to get pissed, and they're going to say, hey, when are our sons and husbands and brothers coming home? And the government's going to be, they ain't never coming home. They're all gone. This is an extinction level event in Ukraine, and it's going to collapse. I'll say one more thing about this. The U.S. went to Vietnam and said, hey, we're going to defeat the communists. When they left, who's in charge? The communists. And Vietnam's perfectly fine. They're happy. It's their country. When we went to Afghanistan, we're going to knock the Taliban out of power. We left. Who's in power now? The Taliban. The U.S. goes to Ukraine and says, hey, we got to run the Russians out. I'm going to tell you right now, historically, based on a historical pattern, who the hell is going to be running Ukraine when this thing is over? The Russians. They're going to have to go to Russia because they're going to have a superpower next to them. And they're going to be completely decimated. And you know what the U.S. does? They hightail out of there. When times get tough, they're getting out of there. They're going to leave and abandon Ukraine, and Ukraine's going to have to look next door to Russia. As, let's not forget, Chechen war. The U.S. was behind that. Their fingerprints were all over it. They pushed it, and now the Chechens are the lead. They're all ready to fight for Mother Russia. The day will come when Ukraine's going to be the same. I truly believe that.
Yeah, those are a lot of really good points. And so the one thing that the West has not used is their air power, but they're going to have to decide whether they want to spend that on Ukraine or if they want to spend it on the war they're trying to provoke with China. And I just want to go back to the United States real quick, because we hear about the economic situation in Europe and in the United States. We see people share these videos of streets just full of homeless people or drug addicts. And I know that it's not like that absolutely everywhere, but I don't ever remember seeing anything like that when I was living in the United States, even on TV. It's surreal to me. How is this economic situation in the U.S. and I know when you're there, sometimes it's hard to tell the trajectory as it's changing. It does it slowly, but what is it like there right now, and how do you think that's going to play into this whole situation?
Well, the post-COVID, the homeless situation is terrible. The area that I live in, grew up in this area, Pasadena, Maryland. It's near the Chesapeake Bay, near the water, beautiful area. You would never, the thought of a homeless person, you would never, ever see that. I mean, there wasn't even a thought that you'd see a homeless person in this area. And now there are some areas that, you can go drive down this road, and there's a few shopping centers and this and that, and you'll see homeless people wandering up, and they got a little encampment in the woods. And you go to the major cities, particularly now the major cities, dire poverty, homelessness everywhere. And when an empire's cities are collapsing economically, that means that the empire is collapsing, because the cities in any city, Moscow, St. Petersburg, these are the jewels of Russia. New York, LA, Chicago, these were the jewels of the US empire, right? And now you don't want to go to LA, trust me. or Frisco or some of these places that were the jewels of the U.S. empire. The money was there, everything was there. Oh, the wonderful nightlife was there, and now they're loaded with crime and all this kind of stuff. Now, let me say this: you've got these people in the U.S. who are sadly misguided, because here's what they'll say: yes, that's the Democratic-run cities. They want to arbitrarily divide Democrat because they're still caught in the Democrats are bad and the Republicans are good in this two-party thing, right? Oh, the Democrats are look, drive through Mississippi, Republican areas, dire poverty. Drive through the South, dire poverty in the South. Go to the cities, dire poverty and homeless. This is America. This isn't blue America. This isn't red America. America now is dealing with horrific poverty. A friend of mine was in Frisco recently, and she was telling me, she says, I'm standing there, sitting there, in a car, like an Uber or something. And she's looking at the corner, and there's all these homeless people in tents. And there's like 3 Teslas at a light. One of them is $120,000 Tesla Plaid. So you got these Teslas, these people are concerned about their carbon footprint, and oh, they've got an electric car, and oh, they've got all of this money. And in the background, in this wealthy city, are impoverished people pooping on the streets. And that's America now. That we used to, we go impoverish a country, and so we're living wealthy, and this poor country is impoverished because we're taking them to the cleaners. And now you can see that dynamic on the streets of the United States. Things are collapsing, falling apart, and people can see it. And intuitively, people understand, even those who don't know what we may know if they don't research it. Intuitively, they understand something is desperately wrong here, and we need another direction. A recent poll said 74% of Americans believe that we're going in the wrong direction, right? What the hell's up with the other 26% who looks at this mess? Oh yeah, this is great. Nuclear war, homeless people, 60% of America doesn't have $500 in the friggin' bank, but we're going in the right direction. I would like to talk to some of those 26 people and say, if this is the right direction, what does the wrong direction look like?
Well put. I just wonder how much of it has to do with the fact that the government is focused outward instead of inward. They're investing in their empire overseas rather than at home. And I think we've kind of seen this unfold over time. It's not something that just suddenly happened. It's not something just because Joe Biden is president now, a Democrat is president now. It's something that has been happening no matter who is in the White House. And I guess that kind of brings us to China, because this is the other war that the U.S. is attempting to provoke. While they already have this proxy war against Russia going, this is a much larger, more powerful country. Economically speaking, the United States is so entwined economically with China, and their window of opportunity is closing. You were talking about them impoverishing other countries. Now they're impoverishing themselves. I think that's because the imperialism, if you want to call it that, is turning inward because they're running out of countries they have the ability to raid and exploit externally. So what is how do you see this whole situation with China going? And again, how are Americans perceiving this? Because I personally think that Americans have a very troubling background. It's very easy to convince them that China is the enemy. Chinese people, Asian people are the enemy. It's a downhill fight for Washington, I think.
Well, yeah, here's the thing about it. I think the problem that the U.S. is having, a couple things. Bill Gates was recently in China saying, I think we should get along with China a little better. And as was Elon Musk. Why? Because these wealthy people are making a lot of money dealing with China. China is a very, is a great economy. It's a strong economy. And if you want to make money, if you can invest in China, or if you can work with them to have them do some of your business, they're a very business friendly country. And, the government has control of the economy. So if you go do business with them and you're in good with the government, you're probably not going to get screwed over there. So I think that, in my opinion, I think the neocons have screwed things up so bad in Ukraine, they're not going to be able to drag Europe in. Yeah, the European Union, apparently they've got some meeting or something coming up. And I was reading this draft proposal they have. And the draft proposal says they ain't going along with it. The draft proposal says something like, we will not agree with any aggressive actions against China. I mean, you read it, it's like, oh, the neocons can't be happy with this. I think that the Europeans are falling off that wagon of let's go against NATO against China. I think that Taiwan is a problem for the U.S. because the people in Taiwan, you know, I know you're familiar with my infamous saga with the infamous tweet in Taiwan. So I think what's also happening is the people in Taiwan are looking at what's happening in Ukraine. They're looking on social media, and the people of Taiwan are starting to say, hey, I think we're being had. I think we're being set up. And I think that we may be looking at a dynamic where the neocons are very desperate because they're afraid. I mean, who the hell knows? Taiwanese politics are very, very fickle. So you don't know for sure that the KMT is going to win. That's the opposition party that is not in. I'll put it like this. They're a nationalist party. And while they're not, you know, some lefty party by any stretch of the imagination, and they don't necessarily want reunification, but they want the status quo. Here's what they don't want to get blown to hell. They don't want to get turned into Bakhmut. So they're just practical. They're more realistic and practical to say, hey, why don't we just chill out, be friends? Everybody's could keep getting, you know, we all got to eat. We'll work with China. We'll have jobs. Everything will be no war. We won't all get killed. Let's do this. So I think the KMT is in a position to win. And we're in it. The dangerous thing is that the neocons are probably afraid. What the hell do we do if a party comes to power in Taiwan that says, get the hell out, we ain't going along with this? And that leaves them, of course, with the other option, which is Korea. The other option, if they can't get a war through that, then they got to try to get a war with Korea. The problem they got there is the North Koreans got nukes, and the North Koreans have made it clear. If you try to take us out, our last dying move will be to press this button and screw you over. So you better be wary of that. So they got problems. They got Taiwan falling off the wagon, and they got North Korea sitting there with their finger over the nuclear button saying, don't even think about it or you're done. So things aren't looking good for the neocons in China. We all know if they could, they would. If they could, they would. But I just see things going in a terrible direction. And at home, people are war weary. So it's going to be harder to push this at home. It's harder to push it in Taiwan. It's harder to push it in the EU. So I feel positive. Not saying things can't go bad, but I feel positive about the direction that I see things going.
What do you make of the trip of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Beijing saying, look, I repaired relations, and then President Biden calling President Xi Jinping a dictator, and then Secretary Blinken going along with that and saying, yes, absolutely, he's a dictator. So basically undoing any goodwill they might have. I don't think China bought it at all, but any goodwill they could have possibly have gotten out of that trip evaporated almost instantly. What do you make of that? Is this just they can't help themselves, or is there something else at play?
There's a couple of things I think going on here. We can learn from what has happened the last couple of months. There are indicators. If you remember Joe Biden saying, I think there's going to be a thaw. Remember that? And they botched it all up, but he did say it. That's an indicator. When Biden said, I think there's going to be a thaw in Chinese-U.S. relationships, that something's going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. There are some powers that are pushing on the Biden administration saying, we don't want a war with China. That's going clearly. And look, what the hell do you think what's Bill Gates going to China shaking hands with people? And Elon Musk, some very powerful oligarchs are going to China shaking hands openly. It's in the news. And then coming back saying, we don't want a war with China. These are powerful. These are the richest people in the world. When they say jump, politicians got to say how high. So clearly there is at least a faction of the ruling elite who don't want their money, their gravy train cut off. It's going to be hard for Joe Biden to say no to people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates. So then we are hearing from Biden. So we get these indicators, Gates, Musk, Biden saying there's going to be a thaw. Then add Blinken goes there, and Tony Blinken, a guy who, can't even spell the word diplomacy. This guy's just a madman. So he goes there and he's like, hey guys, perhaps we were a little bit out of line with all of this Taiwan independence stuff. Why don't we try to, work things out? And they read him the Riot Act and they say, you better say uncle. And he basically says, all right, we don't support Chinese independence. And it comes back. Those are all, I was a former investigator. These are breadcrumbs. put all of those things together, don't view them independently, and you see that there is some very powerful factions saying, you better get off of this Chinese war train. Now, Biden, oh, he's a dictator. Well, there's two ways, there's one of two things it could have been. It could have been that Biden is representing the other factions or speaking to the other factions that don't want this thought. It could also be that this guy don't know what the hell he's doing on any given day, and he's just mumbling things out. So either of those is true. Either way, in the background, it is clear that there are powerful factions who are trying to turn down the volume on this let's go to war with China stuff. That's what's important, because the politicians will have to respond to people who are that powerful. Well, let's say Blinken comes back and Biden says, Xi's a dictator. The Blinken people kind of hesitated. You notice they didn't say anything for a couple days. They just kind of chilled, like, okay, what do we do now? Oh, and then he comes out, I back him, I support him. I think they had to think about it, and they had to decide, how are we going to respond to this? And what we're seeing too is all of that shows this. There's an instability in the neocon world. We got intelligence people leaking to Seymour Hersh like hell on any given day. They're leaking to Seymour Hersh every other day, something from the insiders. So there's some instability in the neocon world, and there's people pushing and pulling one way or the other. They're unstable. They don't know what to do. Everything they have touched has turned to crap right now. And I think it's all coming due. And I think there's an old saying, beware the fury of a patient man. And, the infamous rope-a-dope, where Muhammad Ali fought a far physically superior opponent. He was much larger and stronger, and he just ducked around the ropes. He called it rope-a-dope. He ducked around for seven rounds until the guy had swung himself tired, and then he knocked him out. And I kind of think that's what the Russians and Chinese are doing with the neocons. The neocons are like, yes, we're in power. We got it all. We're going for it now, man. We finally got all this power, and now we're going to do it all. And I think the Russians and Chinese are just kind of sitting back, slow walking, keep doing it. And at some point, they're burning themselves out. They're screwing it all up. And I would just say to the Russian people who are like, we got to act now, hurry up. Time is a great weapon. It's like martial arts. Anything that's a weapon. Watch a Jackie Chan movie. He goes into a room. If there's plates, he picks them up and throws them at you. If there's a pool balls, he picks them up. Anything around him, he uses as a weapon, right? Time is a very valuable weapon. And I think that Russia and China, being very old societies, long-thinking societies, understand that their most valuable weapon against these neocons is time. And they're just slow-walking them. And they can't lose if they slow-walk them, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think Russia and their intervention in Syria kind of proved your point there. I have actually just did a video about the U.S.-Chinese tensions and Blinken's trip to Beijing. And I'm very pessimistic. I hope you're right about this. And it is a compelling idea that there is some faction that is looking at the direction of the U.S. and just self-preservation alone. They're saying, this is bad for everybody. I mean, we want to continue robbing and helping ourselves. We can't do it if we go over the cliff like this. So I think that is a very good point. If you read the Western media, they make it out as if, there's all of this hatred for China. It's growing. You see them feeding the public hatred. Is it, on the ground, is it actually taking root?
Well, here's the thing. I'm looking at an article right now. Bill Gates visits China after 8 years. Xi Jinping calls him an old friend. You got to understand how much power Bill Gates has. You got to understand that this country is run by a handful of oligarchs. When he goes, now think this is June 17th, right? Describing Bill Gates as an old friend, Xi expressed his desire for cooperation that would mutually benefit both China and the U.S. reports Reuters, right? So clearly, you know what I mean? What do you do? There ain't no way that Joe Biden's going to call Bill Gates and, read him the riot act. There's no way that Bill Gates does this in a vacuum, that Bill Gates just woke up one day and said, it's Friday. think I'll head over to China and say hi. He's making a fortune in China. He is representing a block of powerful people. And the fact this is in the news, this was done deliberately to send a message, to send a very powerful message. And do you think it's an accident that you put these things together? Who thought that Blinken would go to China? Like, hey, you guys want me to say this or that? I'll say it. How can we work things out? Now we're reading this. The U.S. says they want military cooperation. How can we get military cooperation? How can we open the phones up? How can we do this? And Bill Gates just happens to show up in China and say, hey, how's it going there, old buddy, old pal? I believe that what we may be seeing is, and look, people don't understand this. There are always historically fights between various factions of the ruling elite. You've got the people who are the commodity people, the Exxon Mobils of the world and the gas and the oil people of the world, right? And they're saying, we got to overthrow Russia because we want to take all those commodities. Then you got these industrial power people. Hey, we've got to overthrow China because they've got industrial power. We got to steal their industry. You know what I'm saying? So you've got factions of the ruling elite whose foreign policy may be imperialist or maybe assertive, but for different reasons, they want to go after different people. Now what we're seeing is, we've got probably Silicon Valley, who's taking a beating over all of these changes in chips, who are looking at the future saying, if we go to war with China, Silicon Valley is going to look like downtown San Francisco, where, there's homeless people wandering the street looking for something to eat and someplace to poop. That's Silicon Valley. And they're like, we ain't going, our bank already crashed. We ain't going down like that. And I think that's what Bill Gates is representing, the Silicon Valley people, who, let's not forget, have a very powerful foothold in the Democratic Party.
And remember, Elon Musk has talked positively about China. He has a factory in China, a Tesla factory in Shanghai. He's contributing to this proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. And I was just thinking, that's not a very good move, because if you help the US do this, the next step is China. I mean, these two conflicts are linked directly together. So if it moves on to China, he's going to lose his factory, because they're going to force everyone to leave, just like they did with Russia. So he has to be thinking about that, if for nothing else, self-preservation. I remember this one speech with a U.S. Air Force general where he was talking to him, and the general was trying to get him to say all these negative things about China, and he's like, look, China's bigger. They're gonna surpass us. It's just gonna happen. And we just have to do our best and take care of our own business. It's a very reasonable thing, whatever you want to think about Elon Musk. So I think you're bringing up a very valid point. We're coming up onto an hour. If anyone has any questions for Garland, just put it in the comment section, capital Q or question in all caps, and then your question. And let's see, where do we want to go from there? Because the video is Washington's war against the world, and I'm talking about against Russia, against China.
Well,
against
let's talk about what's happening in the Africa, the Middle East, the other parts of the world, Latin America. I think it's critical. The neocons have created a dynamic where a lot of countries in the world that have suffered at the hands of the U.S. and the U.K. and France, et cetera, over the course of literally centuries. When the Ukraine war started, the U.S. thought, since we bully these countries around anyway, we'll just call them and say, you better go along with us against Russia. And these countries are like, the bully is down. Let's all jump on the bully. You know what I mean? And you listen to the Africans, and what do they say? They say, hey, man, when we were fighting for our freedom from Great Britain and France and blah, 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 it was the Soviet Union that provided us with weapons. It was the Soviet Union that helped us to get our freedom from these countries. So now I think we're going with the Soviet Union and China. The Middle East, what the Chinas did, what China was able to do there. The U.S. is there saying we're there to bring stability by providing weapons and bombing the hell out of everybody in the Middle East. The Chinese went in there. The Russians had done a lot of work under the scenes, and they used guys in suits. They used diplomacy, and they fixed this thing quick, and it's going in a direction. And the Chinese are saying, hey, man, this Palestinian Israel issue, why don't you let us get a piece of this? I think we can work something out. And at some point, because the Shiite and the Sunni Muslim world is coming together, the Israelis are going to have to. at some point they're going to have to call somebody and try to find a way out of this, because once the Muslim world is fully combined and connected, Israel's going to be in too big a danger. They're going to have everybody on all sides saying, "Hey, man, you better chill out on the Palestinians." The U.S. bases, they're saying they're going to get run out of there. You know, recently the Iraqis, some of these big private military units have gone to the Iraqi government saying the Americans have to go. The Americans have to stop screwing up. We're giving you an ultimatum. So the bases in the U.S., the U.S. bases around the Middle East are going to be facing, rocket fire, mortar fire, literal, attacks. I just think that if you look at what's happening in what used to be considered the third world, China's going there. Russia's going there, and they're respecting them. They're saying, look, we understand your society may not be into certain things that other people aren't into. We may not agree with what's going on, or we may agree with what's going on. We will respect your ability to run your country the way you want to. We'll leave you alone. Let's do some business. And by the way, wouldn't you like a nice new airport and some roads to transport that lithium on? Sure. There you go. How about and a new port? And we'd be happy to come use our ships to buy the stuff from you. And we can use the roads and the ports and the railroads that we just built to do that. And the Africans are like, great, let's do it. Here's a business opportunity. So I think what we're looking at is people finding legitimate business opportunities as opposed to getting their countries cooed, overthrown, blown up, occupied, etc. And just the world is going in a different direction. And the U.S., it's interesting. They said, we're going to isolate Russia. It ain't Russia that's getting isolated. Putin and Lavrov, they go to the Middle East or Africa. People, they treat it like rock stars. I'm always putting up pictures in Africa. All these Africans holding up Russian flags. Yay, we love Russia. But pictures of Putin in China or what have you. So who's losing this thing worldwide? I think the Eurasian coalition, that's what I like to call it. Russia, India, China, etc. The Russia, India, China led coalition is winning in the world, and they're winning by treating people with decency and respect and with equality. Something important. I was watching that there was this South Africans, and they were saying the Russians treat us as though they're, as equals. They treat us as equals. They treat us with decency and respect, whereas the Americans treat us like they're lessers. And so we're just looking at and that, of course, would take us into, there's a new world economic order that's being built, created by the United States sanctions. It's created by U.S. sanctions. It's created by U.S. oppressions. They've isolated themselves, they've isolated themselves. And buy Bitcoin and gold. Yeah. Now, I'm just joking. I do not give economic advice. Just because I'm buying Bitcoin, it doesn't mean that other people have to.
Yeah, so and what it seems like is Russia, China, they're constructively engaging with the world. They're helping people build tangible things, and the U.S. is coming to take things or tell them what to do with their foreign policy or even their domestic policy. And what's happening is the world is changing, where the U.S. really doesn't have any more room to do what it has been doing all of these decades. They're turning inward, and that is unsustainable. So what's going to happen is, and just as you suggested, you have all of these interests, even if they're people we don't really like, but they're interests that are invested in their own self-preservation. They're going to think of a new way to engage with the world constructively. And maybe they might give up on this idea of global hegemony, because it's just impractical. It's impossible, I would say. We probably don't have a time for a lot of questions, but they're asking about the U.S. invasion of Mexico. I think this is more of a distraction or maybe scapegoating. I don't know what to make of this. I really can't see that. So what do you think about that?
Here's what's going on. This is not an accident. Put this together. The president of Mexico, AMLO, says we got to be friends with Cuba and Nicaragua, and what the United States is doing is wrong. What the U.S. is doing is wrong with China. He's on the right side of all of these with Russia. Hey, we need peace in Russia, right? He then goes on to say, hey, what you're doing with Julian Assange is wrong. Send Julian Assange to Mexico. We'll take him. He'll be free here, right? Then he says, look, the U.S. is stealing our oil and gas. We're going to nationalize our gas and oil, and we'll keep it ourselves. Exxon, you guys, you got to leave, right? So and then the U.S., if you read, there's all thes articles. He's suddenly, AMLO's a dictator. He is stopping even though like he's overwhelmingly, supported by the people of Mexico. Now suddenly he's a dictator, right? So he goes against U.S. foreign policy. He goes against the U.S. attack on Assange. Suddenly he's a dictator. And then all of a sudden the U.S. says, I think we need to send troops to the Mexican border for immigration. Yeah. And maybe we should bomb Mexico for drugs. Yeah. No, it has nothing to do with immigration. It has nothing to do with drugs. They are trying to intimidate the president of Mexico because he's not on board and he's pushing back against all the U.S. imperialist stuff. So, yeah, that's what the threats to Mexico, sending troops to the border for immigration is all about. It is the mafia techniques of intimidating the country next door. To basically, it's a message to AMLO. You better stop all of this. I love Julian Assange and I'm going along with the Russians and Chinese. Mexico has applied to be part of BRICS. And like I said, you're kicking Exxon Mobil in these countries out. They want to keep their own stuff. That's what these threats to Mexico are really about.
That makes so much more sense. And sometimes the simplest explanation is the right explanation. And the U.S. really is, isn't it, a global mafia? It's a mafia on a global scale. That's how they do business. We see so many examples of that. So I think that's a really good explanation. We're at the 1 hour mark. I think I got
about 10 more minutes and I got to get ready to run because I got to go to DC. So I got about 10 more minutes.
Okay. Let's see if we have any other questions here. Or is there anything else that you think is important that we haven't touched on yet that you'd like to put out there?
Well, I think we could talk a little bit about the 2024 election. And that is that, this Trump thing, that the empire is horrified of Donald Trump, so much so that they're basically, if you think about it, the leading opposition party, the leading candidate of the opposition party, and dare I say, the last time I checked, he was 6 points ahead of Biden. So he is the leading candidate, period, for 2024 at this point. And New York, here's what a lot of people don't understand, that lawsuit that E. Jean Carroll filed against Donald Trump for sexual harassment in New York, or whatever it was, for rape, whatever she claimed. The New York legislation, she couldn't file the lawsuit because it was past the statute of limitations. The New York legislature passed a law that said, well, we'll make a 1 year period so that if you're in the statute of limitations, we'll open up a year where you can now do it. As they passed the law at midnight. Immediately after midnight, she filed the lawsuit. So the New York legislature passed the law specifically so she could go after Donald Trump. Next, what do we have? Now they charge him with these documents. Meanwhile, Biden's got boxes of documents behind an old Corvette in his garage. Now they're saying, oh, by the way, we're going to charge him in Georgia. We're looking at him for January 6th. It is so obvious that they're persecuting Donald Trump that it is hard to deny. So we're going into the 2024 election where the deep state and the party in power has launched a vicious and brutal attack on their leading political opponent. Just if you can beat them. But they're afraid because they know they can't beat them. And we haven't even fallen into the recession yet, which we are going to fall into. Right. So I think it's important to look at the dynamics surrounding them going after Trump, which just makes him more popular. When you have an unpopular system and the system goes after somebody, that person looks like a hero. So they're making Donald Trump look better and better and better. Joe Biden, here's what I say. There ain't no way this guy's going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party in 2024. He's wandering around the stage. For God's sake, the guy needs a service dog to find his way off the stage half the time. He's lost. He's wandering around with both of his hands sticking out like this, like a robot. He's You know, he recently said Putin's going to leave in Iraq. God save the Queen. He doesn't know what's going on. He has declined cognitively to a point over the first 2 years. There ain't no way in the world another year and 3/4 or the year and a half, whatever it is, that this guy's going to be in a condition to debate Donald Trump or anybody else. So they're in a mess. They've got Biden, who's not going to be able to run. They got Kamala Harris, who's the only person in Washington, D.C., who is cognitively impaired more than Joe Biden. And hers, she didn't even have to get old for it to happen. So they can't run either one of these people. And meanwhile, they got RFK Jr. there, who, let's face it, he's RFK Jr. A lot of older people are going to think to themselves, yeah, you know, back in the days, the Democratic Party was the Democratic Party, and there were people named Kennedy running around. We kind of want to go back to those days. They got a mess on their hands, and Biden is not. This is my prediction. He can't be the candidate. They can't hide him that much, and he is cognitive declining. He hasn't not like gone bad cognitively. He is declining quickly, and people who have those, you know, many of us have had people in our families who have had dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that. And it's just like empire. It happens slowly and then suddenly. You come to a period for someone that has those kind of problems, and they'll be hanging along, hanging on, and then whoop, just like a cliff, you got to, you know, I've had a family member that happened to, you know, just like that. They have to be guided around and they can't take care of themselves anymore. And at some point, Joe Biden ain't all that far from that. So we're going to see the Democratic Party trying to figure out. And then what do? Do they just say, all right, we're going to put some guy in there who's going to lose to RFK Jr. by 25 points and we're going to give it to him anyway? That's political suicide. So it's going to be interesting watching. The 2024 election is going to be really, really interesting. And as the Ukraine conflict gets less popular, as it starts to fall apart and spin out of control from the perspective of the neocons, and collapse, and that's going to have a significant impact on the 2024 election. Like I said, it's going to be interesting to watch.
And okay, I think if people have time and energy to vote, and they vote, even if they don't believe that it's going to make any difference at all, but they just, like this guy said the most things that I agree with.
Yeah.
Just vote for him as kind of like a protest against the system.
Yep.
This person's rejecting the system. That's why I'm voting for them. Not
I wrote in Jesse Ventura last time. 2020, I wrote in Jesse Ventura. I've talked to him, and he's a nice guy. I like him. He's better than any of these schmucks. So I knew, again, like you said, it was a protest vote. Cornell West, whoever, write in somebody, do something, go in and vote. Because imagine, see, people don't realize this. What happens if some guy who gets write-in votes gets 20% of the votes or 15% of the votes? It makes a difference. What happens in the Senate? People think, oh, the system is too powerful. Our Senate, there are a lot of arcane rules that allow one senator to hold up stuff. What happens if you get one independent senator that won't go along with it? What happens if you get three? And now what happens is this: you've got two parties, and each party wants to control the Senate. And now they've got three independents. They got to go to those independents and say, if you'll caucus with us, we control the Senate. Those three independents can say, we'll caucus with you, but you got to give us this, 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 and this, or we don't. Whichever party gives us these things controls the Senate. So you can get two senators in and blow the whole system up. So it's not as hard as people think, particularly in the Senate. You get two senators in, and those two senators can decide which party controls the Senate. Game, set, and match.
And besides voting, what else can people do? I mean, especially if you're an American, you're in America, you see that everything is in the wrong direction. What kind of things can people do other than vote? I mean, I would say.
Here's something I'd say: continue to support alternative media. That's a good long-term, both short-term and long-term. Support alternative media. All of the various alternative media channels that you like, promote them, share them, tell your friends about them. Because if somebody goes on alternative media, they'll hear some things that'll wake them up. So I believe the big thing that everybody can do right now is promote your favorite I'm not even going to tell you which one. I'm not saying mine or Brian's or whatever. Your favorite alternative media channels, support them. And if you find a particular show on one of those, on Ukraine or China or Africa, whatever, and you're like, hey, I like, that's a really good show. Promote it on all your social media. Tell your friends about it. That's what we need to do. We need to wake people up. People can't change until they wake up. So we got to wake people up first. And you can do that by supporting alternative media. However, I'm not saying you have to give money to a channel. If you can afford it, fine. But you can support alternative media by sharing stuff and just telling people, you know, whatever. Get a Duran shirt. And you wear that around and people say, what's that? Those weird little eagles. Oh, the Duran. And then you can tell them, go watch it. You know, whatever the case.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And it really does make a difference. And so when, like I said, when people wake up, they don't go back to sleep. That's the advantage we have when you're fighting for the truth. They say it stands on its own. It defends itself. I guess that's a good.
Yeah. One other thing I got to say. Can you imagine this? What happens if the system goes to take out Trump and Cornel West and RFK Jr., blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Trump, etc., right? I mean, think about this. If you would take Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Cornel West, you take a handful of people like that, they have the majority of the voters in the United States. If you take the people that would vote for those people, you have an overwhelming majority of the electorate. What happens if all of those people, or at least most of them, start to come together and say, you know, we're going to form a different party. We're going to run somebody on whatever Green Party, whatever party it is. We're going to put together a coalition. If you start, you've got so many people now that are becoming the outsiders, right? What happens if all of those outsiders start to come together in some way, shape, or form to try to fight back against the system? I think that is a great opportunity. And that's something that I'm predicting will come to fruition, that there will be some odd fellows come in. I don't say that in a, you know, ain't trying to misgender anybody. Wouldn't want to piss off the rainbow imperialist. But you know, all jokes aside, if we get a group of political odd fellows start to come together, like the whole Rage Against the War Machine people, the Rand Paul people. All of these people start to come together and say, look, man, we don't want a nuclear war. We don't want total destruction. We have some disagreements. Let's have a party that's just about practical politics first and says, get the hell out of all of this neocon craziness. Let's kind of take our money and rebuild some of our roads and our electrical, some things that we can agree on. At least we'll do those things. That's what I'd like to see happen. And that's what I predict is going to start to happen. As they beat the hell out of enough people, those people are going to come together and realize they got a lot in common. So I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic.
Yes. I kind of agree with that. And again, we were talking about businesses that are looking for the exits because they're looking at the foreign policy and they don't see a future with any of this. So I think things are arriving at a point of change. It'll have to change or it has to end. So since we're talking about supporting alternative media, where can people find, follow, and support you and your work?
Well, other than my terrestrial stations, which speak for themselves, here's what I would say to everybody. I'm on both YouTube and Rockfin. Find me there. I'm on @Garland Nixon on Twitter. Certainly Garland Nixon on Telegram. Follow my Telegram channel, my YouTube channel. Go there, subscribe my YouTube and Rockfin channel. That's, you know, my online presence.
Okay, and the links to all of that will be in the video description below, and I will pin a comment at the very top with all of the links so people can find, follow, and support your work. Garland, thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday to join me. I hope to have you on again, and keep up the excellent work.
Thanks a lot. Certainly, certainly appreciate it. Be happy to come on again.
And to everyone who tuned in, thank you so much. And until next time, bye for now.